Welcome, everyone. I'm Bartosz from Solana Labs. I started at Solana roughly a year and a half ago when it was still like less than 20 people and outside of, I guess, of top 100 under market cap. So fairly small blockchain. Most people didn't hear about it then. And it was an interesting journey, at least throughout the year. So fun fact, when I started working at Solana, I was on my non-compete, and I was planning to go to work for Jump. But then I stayed at Solana. Hopefully we are good friends. So this year, if I was thinking what will be the most important this year, so obviously for the beginning, everyone knows about it. We have been struggling with slowness in the network. And everyone, including Anatoly, is working hard throughout the versions that have been pushed. So 1.8.10, 1.8.11, 12, and now 13 is working on figuring out how we can handle the strange behavior that we are seeing from the bots that are either trying to get into JPEGs or trying to get into IDOs. And there's a lot of people from Certus One, Pyth, Jump, and the validator community like RPC Pool that are working closely together. If you want to follow what's happening, you should go join Solana Discord, MB Validators channel. People are sitting there trying to actively solve this. It's a live system, so problems like that are always somewhat challenging because there's not really a good environment where you can really test it. And we are also trying to be deliberate and not push changes too fast to the production system and introduce more outages because we're trying to prevent something. But I think by the end of February, problems like that will be resolved, and we'll see more growth from the Pyth network, like more symbols being published, and more protocols and NFTs building actively on Solana. And that kind of leads me to the next point, where I think the growth of the ecosystem, growth from the institutional participants and retail users is what will drive the network forward throughout this year. And that's why we are focusing on this in-person events with the partners like Pyth, Jump Crypto, organizing bootcamps, organizing hacker houses, where we can train more engineers, teach people of what's DeFi, what's happening on Solana, what's happening in the blockchain in general, and how it can be utilized by your business, and how we can innovate together, building different protocols. We had a couple of interesting innovations happening throughout the bootcamp. So Jerry, that was teaching both last bootcamps, also helped coordinate a couple of the projects. So we did one with Jump Trading and a few other people from CTC in November last year. And the people that were doing the bootcamp started building protocols from within the companies that they are there. So we have a protocol that's called Dexterity that should be coming out soon as well. That's focusing on the financial aspect and building derivatives and other cash-settled products on Solana. It's built on top of new Serum that has the agnostic order book. So what that means is you can trade on Serum without using tokenized assets. If you are following what's happening in the open source, you should definitely look at that project. Look at Serum in general. If you're an engineer, submit pull requests to those projects. Same with Pyth and Wormhole. Those projects are definitely getting more traction, with more chains being onboarded to Wormhole and Pyth onboarding more network participants. You can always reach out to me, I guess, about any of them if you need help. I'm fairly closely involved in different projects, so happy to always talk about them. More NFTs, hopefully, if people are into NFTs. So my journey from Solana was previously I worked, before Solana, I worked 10 years in finance, building trading systems. And when I started at Solana, Anatoly was always like, you need to build more DeFi protocols. We want to be the DeFi chain. That was the narrative that was happening for first 6 months. And then we were like, okay, everyone is saying Solana is just for DeFi. maybe we should add something else, and they started working on NFTs. And that has been going somewhat crazy. I think last year we had 6 million NFTs minted on Solana from 0 at the beginning of the year, so fairly good growth. Hopefully this year will be even better. But the NFTs are somewhat interesting because everyone is thinking about them as just JPEGs or maybe videos and how they can be utilized in general culture. But they can also be used for representing financial instruments and general access to the protocols. So if you are trying to build private network within the public network, you could use assets like NFTs to guard access or gate access into your protocols. That works fairly well. And I guess with all the bootcamps that focuses on institutional growth, we are running in next to them the hacker houses that focus on building the developer ecosystem and then bringing the user adoption. And you can see that in the numbers. For example, from Phantom, which is one of the most popular wallets on Solana, towards the end of the year, they were growing roughly 100,000 new users a month, which is really good growth. And now they are directly behind MetaMask in terms of number of active users. And we are just like pushing farther. And what was interesting is we are focusing really on the growth of the users outside of existing crypto users, bringing new users into the ecosystem. And Phantom has been fairly well tracking that, where I think 60% of their users is actually coming outside of crypto. Brand new users, so super exciting. What else? In terms of interesting protocols that you could look, we are releasing a new version of token program that will support zero knowledge proof and confidential payments. That's fairly interesting. So token program was this first smart contract really deployed on Solana in public, where you can tokenize anything. And it took different approach to building tokens on Solana from what's happening on the EVM chains, where it's really single smart contract that doesn't have any state and allows you to create tokens without writing any code. And the privacy payments using new program will be somewhat similar. You can deploy still your new tokens, and you can use them to build protocols like Venmo, for example, where you can have private payments between two parties without knowing the amount, but still verify that the transfer happened. So that will be coming at the beginning of the year as well. And a few other interesting protocols that people have been working on. And those will be like coming either from Solana Labs or people that are closely working on them. I think going to the hacker house after this finishes and talking with the teams, what they are building, what Metaplex is building, you can definitely see how the ecosystem is growing, which is somewhat interesting. I was surprised by the growth. If you ask me in January last year where Solana will be heading, I definitely wouldn't say we'll be here where we are right now. Electric Capital had a report where we started last year with roughly 250 engineers, full-time engineers building in open source. And they published a new one last month with Solana having roughly 1,000 engineers full-time building protocols. And I hope by the end of this year, we'll be at around 4,000, growing roughly 4x year over year, which is the fastest growth of the developers in the ecosystem of the major blockchains out there right now. Yeah, maybe with that, I will answer any questions.
Cool. Thanks for the time, and I really appreciate it. One of the questions I just had for you is any kind of thoughts as far as helping educate the ecosystem as from some of these upgrades that we'll be making, particularly in February that you talked to. I only ask because I think one of the biggest challenges in the ecosystem is informing people and letting them know that some of those fixes are coming, and also kind of elaborating on the issues that did happen. I think a really great example is the update to the validators that alleviated some of the replay issues. And I think that just being able to address that and talking about that a little bit more will reassure people in the ecosystem and those from the outside looking in that these fixes are coming and this stuff is in the works.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat tricky because I don't think it's, like I said, it's a live system. Whenever we are publishing fixes, we hope for the best. but then don't want to go and say, hey, this will happen, because it's a live system. You don't know. We hope that most of the issues would be resolved with like 11, then 12, and now we are 13. It's keep improving, but at the same time, it's chasing this like vanishing point, and eventually, like it's performance. Like any engineer knows that trying to improve performance of the system when the system is running is like trying to replace an engine of the plane that's flying. You need to be very deliberate about it. So it's tricky to communicate very strong message like, hey, like 1.8.13 is the version, and then like miss that target. I would rather not do that. But people that are interested can go to the MB validators and get all the answers really that they need. Rather than us publishing like a Medium article or a blog post. It's like, hey, we think it solved it, and then it's not solved. And you can always talk with people from Certus One or Brian over there. He's running a lot of validators, including the validators that are supporting explorers in the ecosystem and wallets. You can definitely talk about what, like how he views it from the validator perspective.
Thank you.
All right. Next one. And I can talk about anything, the outlook, what happened in the past.
How are you, man?
Long week, long week.
Long week.
And last week, but it's good, it's good. I'm really happy seeing everyone here. Thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you. So NFTs, to this crowd, you know, you mentioned some privacy. I want to hear some of the interesting things you're thinking about, because you think a lot about this. But like a college transcript, you know, you could tell the provenance of it. I actually graduated. That could be public. But if you want to see the detail, like, I have to release it to you.
Yep.
You know, so that's kind of like an idea of how NFTs can really evolve. But what's like the coolest idea you've heard of that, like public, private?
I mean, yeah, so that's definitely on top of our mind. We brainstormed about it like probably a month ago with Larry sitting here. So if you want to know more, he's the expert. And we are building something that's called stealth NFTs. So from the engineering perspective, it allows exactly what you described, having public metadata and private metadata with verifying the ownership, where the private metadata is encrypted, and you can decrypt it if you hold the NFT in your wallet. So I could send, for example, to Jump my resume. It says Bartosz, you know you received it, that I owned it, and then you can decrypt it if you hold that token, but no one else can see the data. And that will be coming, like right now it's in the review with cryptographers that we have internally before we put it out there as an open source thing that people can use. There's a bunch of other interesting use cases that you could build, like business cards, proof of attendance of specific events, like who you met. So quite excited about that one.
Hey, Bartosz. Yeah, I mean, NFTs, a lot of times we look at the NFTs and say, okay, it's just a JPEG, that's kind of lame. But like you just discussed with privacy, the NFTs give you a chance to really push technological boundaries. I know you guys spent a lot of time battling bots for the NFT drops, and maybe you've got some more stories to share, or even just some strategies on how you kind of dealt with bots and where you're going with that.
Yeah, sure. So the bots are somewhat tricky, both for the trading perspective and NFTs. In NFTs, the primary reason why bots are problematic is not necessarily because of the network congestion, because there's like the volume of messages that they're sending is not that big. But it's really bad for the community. So if I'm doing a 10,000 NFT drop, I really want the community to be diverse. If there is a person that acquires large supply of that NFTs and tries to flip them immediately for profit, most of the time that NFT project will struggle with the community outrage because of this imbalance. Like someone acquired something really cheaply. And there's a couple of strategies that we started doing. So there was, originally there was a couple of problems. One problem is you can discover technically what's the order and the rarity. So if the team releases the rarity of the NFTs beforehand, the bots can try to snipe effectively the most rare. That increases the EV of that trade much more than like trying everything or trying to capture everything. We started adding CAPTCHA with identity and civic. The CAPTCHAs are not working necessarily very well because there are already like CAPTCHA like farms that are solving them. So the things that we'll be trying is with some of the projects is giving away or pushing more on the identity from different services. So maybe you need to have an active Twitter account, and that needs to be active for X amount of time, diverse enough, and that identifies you as non-bot. Maybe you need to answer a bunch of questions that have been built by humans, combined with CAPTCHA, so like pushing more into user like verification without knowing their identity. Like the most aggressive part, like if you really want to go extreme, you could go full KYC verification with Civic, and that makes it very tricky, but most NFT projects don't really want to go there because why would I need to give you my passport or tell you where I live to buy some art? But maybe it will go there. I mean, it's the bots are definitely the hardest problem for the projects that are giving away for free. So that's Fractal, for example, from Justin Kan. They airdropped on people 100,000 NFTs, and they did it mostly through Discord. So I think whitelisting and some form of delay reveal of the attributes and the rarities is what will allow you eventually to fight the bots more. The question ultimately is about how do you make the trade for the bot like EV negative on upfront, or the profit is not guaranteed, and you need to force them into do more actions or spend more money or time before executing that trade. And that's pretty much it. But at the same time, you don't want to lose the users.
Hey, Bartosz, thanks for the talk. Yeah, I think, like recently I've been looking into the different use cases that are coming to Solana, like in EVM chains, we've seen everything from just traditional NFTs related to artwork to, of course, DeFi taking it over, but also people have done a lot of work on things related to like data marketplaces or going down to looking into use cases of IoT. And so, like exploring the ecosystem of Solana, I feel like those are still missing. Like let's see, like the Solana IoT use case, data marketplaces, perhaps something related to autonomous systems or robotics. What do you think we'll start to see more of these kind of use cases being implemented on Solana?
So I think IoT are great. So you'll probably see more of that with like large-scale events that potentially are happening with like bracelets, RFIDs, and like things that are deployed in the wild. Let's say Solana last year sponsored Lollapalooza in Chicago. If we wanted to do some activation on site, we would probably start working with like bracelets that have RFID and maybe something deployed throughout the festival, and that probably would work fairly well. In that case, you just need to think how you sync the state, because during this like large-scale events and having the devices of like in strange places prevents you to have the very chatty protocol for communication, and you cannot rely really on the connectivity. So that kind of prevents sometimes submitting all the transactions. So you need to figure out how you like roll them up and like how you verify the state and stuff like that. I think it will be coming this year. We are working on a couple of things with Metaplex and the other partners. I don't know many projects doing robotics, but maybe, I don't know, maybe. I'm less bullish on robots.
Awesome, and I guess I have more of a follow-up question. So from just your overview on the Solana ecosystem, what are other kind of interesting NFT use cases that you're seeing pop up? I mean, I think like the metaverse related stuff is quite interesting, but I feel like there's still room to innovate.
Yeah, so I really like what the folks from the last bootcamp are trying to do with their Extend project, where it started first as something very simple, where they had, Ben talked about it yesterday from Jump Crypto. They started as like, hey, we'll have this board with pixels on it. And then it evolved into something more where if you if you hold the pixel, it actually has many use cases associated with it, and more of an open protocol for allowing people to build on top of this Cartesian product grid. So that was kind of fun. So taking effect, combining loot and maps into one thing where it's more of an open source environment for building. So trying to, like, seeing more use cases like that, I think is interesting. Like, everyone probably talks about games, but I think games are tricky. Yeah, I want this year at least to be less about PFPs. I think we have a very big saturation of PFP projects across the blockchains, unfortunately.
All right, thank you, Bartosz.
Hi, I was just wondering, for applications such as Pyth, where you have real-time updates, and if you scale that up to, I don't know, X amount of symbols, then the cost can become a real issue. So, and the transaction fees. So I was wondering, are there any plans to further reduce the transaction fees, or is that not in the works?
Sure. So the cost in Solana is split into two parts. One, you have transaction fees, and the other one is rent. Transaction fees are actually much lower than rent. And for the primary reason for that is it's very hard to scale the memory for the validator. So that relationship between the compute and storage will always be asymmetrical. We have definitely plans on the roadmap for this year to reduce the cost of transactions. Not necessarily reducing the cost of storage before the network is more stabilized. So I think Pyth uses both. Like, there's a lot of publishing happening, but there's a lot of storing the information, like some of it historical. So that part will not be reduced. That being said, I know the guys from Pyth Network are working actively on the version that's reducing the cost of publishing and making it more efficient through batching transactions and storing more into larger accounts. So that should be coming.
Thank you.
Awesome. I have a follow-up or sort of a different question to that. So as a sort of newish developer to the Solana ecosystem, I've noticed there are times when the documentation and the source code often go out of sync. Oftentimes you can't trust the documentation to reflect what the most current state, sometimes what the most current state of the source code is. I was just wondering, what's the update cadence of documentation currently, and then are there any ongoing efforts to try to hire more technical writers or sort of make that cadence faster?
I don't know about active roles for the technical writers. I mean, we could have that potentially, but I don't know if that's necessarily on top of the priorities of the hiring. I guess the answer is it's common, is the most up-to-date documentation is code. That's true for Solana across the board. The documentation is also fairly light. So if you see the documentation that's on docs.solana.com, that I would be surprised if that's not in line with what's currently on the network. So I would be very surprised. Point to the example where it says that docs are not updated properly. But they're stored within the same repository at Solana, and developers that are submitting PRs are responsible for updating that with the versions. That being said, that documentation is not very extensive.
I also have a question on Solana programming. This is more...
Do you want to take off your mask, at least for the speaking?
Yeah. There's some criticism that Solana programming is too complicated. And I think part of it stems from the separation of state and computation. And I was just curious, what are your thoughts on that? Maybe you could just talk. I know there's Anchor as a framework to maybe abstract over some of the on-chain programs, I guess specifically I'm referring to.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I'm actually, personally, I'm really big fan of the separation of compute and state. I think it's very important for the network and optimizations that we have down the line to keep that separate. So any form of abstractions could potentially result in your programs having suboptimal performance down the line. The example of that would be, global state in Anchor. if that account is the account that your contract locks itself all the time, you will have throughput problems, and that's what's happening with abstractions. Sometimes they hide things away. In terms of argument, like things are hard, I would say, yeah. I mean, yeah, like work is hard. But joking aside, I think the learning curve is a bit steeper than one you see in Solidity and EVM, but it's much easier to build programs that are scalable and robust for the long term. When you are thinking about like building a scalable Ethereum contract, it's actually very hard, and there is very few tutorials that show you how to do it. And most people like copy-paste code. If I like ask anyone in the audience that did Solidity to come and write on the whiteboard an implementation of dynamically deploying an LP token in AMM, I think they would have problems with that. Because it's hard code. And most people just copy it from OpenZeppelin. On the other hand, on Solana, it's fairly straightforward to do the token. And like, so certain things are harder, certain things are easier. I think the comparisons are tricky. We made different choices in terms of trade-offs. And as engineers, I think that's the primary job that we need to do. Like, we need to think about the trade-offs. I personally picked Solana because I like the trade-offs. And it makes certain things easier. I think that like one thing that makes much easier is, for example, upgrading your programs. Upgradability in Solana, like when I started, you couldn't upgrade your programs. Then we built upgradability into it, and because the state was separated, it was trivial. If you are doing upgradable programs on Solidity, it's actually very tricky, very tricky. Yeah, I don't know. That wasn't satisfying maybe answer, but we'll try to make things easier, but certain principles will not change just because it's hard to do optimizations on the high level when optimizing for developer time. I think it's, when I often think about like building systems, optimizing for developer time is not necessarily what's most important to me. I would rather optimize for transaction cost or storage or execution speed, because this is what scales with the users. Like, and the build time usually it's very fractional in terms of the cost of running protocol over a long time.
Hey, so if you think 2-3 years out from now, if Solana is a much smaller share of the L1s than it is today or than you expect it to be, what do you think are the main reasons that it got there? Would it be lack of execution, or would it be something that another new L1 chain or an upgrade to a chain could be done that would meaningfully disadvantage Solana?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So the blockchain space in general is moving very fast. And I think the hardest part for the systems that you can technically see with the slowdown is those are complex systems that need to be extremely backward compatible and maintained running for the long period of time. So if you have some innovative idea that makes it 10x faster or 100x faster, and it works, it's much easier to build it from scratch than incorporate it into existing blockchain. Definitely on top of our mind, and we definitely want to make Solana like 10x faster. So it's much harder to build something like that. And the equivalent of that would be, comparing Yahoo to Google. If, like, at some point, it will be very hard to make the technology scale 10x, like 10x faster or 10x cheaper, without substantial resources, and I hope Solana will get there, but it's a very fast-moving space. And maintaining backward compatibility of the large code base is very hard. Hi. What are the other questions? Go.
So this is not necessarily specific to Solana, but more smart contract programming in general. How do you prevent security issues early on? Because obviously you can do your own testing internally, but an adversary may be able to figure out a problem on chain on a deployed program and destroy you and potentially your customers.
Yep.
Do you have suggestions on who to look to?
Yeah.
Are there firms that you could hire to audit your code,
Yeah.
best practices, et cetera?
Yeah, 100%. So there are folks from Neodyme. They work closely with Certus One. So to my knowledge, like they are the best security researchers on Solana right now. So if you are building a smart contract on Solana, you should start thinking about it immediately when you start implementing it. It takes roughly 3 to 6 months to get the slot in some of those security researchers. It can cost anywhere between $100,000 to $200,000 to review big contract. So planning that in your budget, both from the time perspective and money, booking that time early, instead of like, oh, we are ready to go to mainnet, who should look at our code? That's like bad approach. Don't do that. There is a bunch of good blog posts about what are the common issues with smart contracts on Solana. The primary ones are around people trusting too much what's coming from the outside. You should assume that everything that's coming from the outside into your program cannot be trusted. That being data in the accounts, people can spoof the accounts, try to take ownership of that. Responses from other programs like CPI calls, modifying the data. Yeah, I mean, and verification, like sometimes the code for verifying that everything is good is more than half of the program that you have. Anchor makes some of these things slightly easier by expressing that into their DSL, but you still should think about like which accounts should be modifiable, how they are initialized, who initialized them where, who has the current ownership, and be very deliberate about that. That's a good question. But yeah, security is hard, especially if you open source it. You should definitely not rely on closed, like if you are thinking, oh, I will keep my smart contract closed source, and that will prevent security issues, that's definitely not a good idea. The BPF can be easily decompiled. People can see your code. It's all public, deployed there. And people will actively try to mess with it if the EV of that action is positive.
Hi. Going back to the conversation earlier about bots and like generally identifying wallets with real human beings, PGP has like a web of trust that kind of attempts to solve a somewhat similar problem. Do you see any like theoretical or like logistical reasons why that wouldn't work for a lot of protocols?
I mean, it could. It's just a question of what's socially acceptable by current market participants. And there is somewhat of a pushback of people relying on networks like that. But from the technical perspective, there's nothing that prevents from deploying something like that. And if you communicate with your users properly, like this is what's required, then it is what it is.
Thank you.
Hi, this is a question about like the Solana like user experience perspective. So like I've been hearing like criticism about like Solana Explorer is a little hard to work with than like Etherscan, right? You know, like Etherscan is kind of a powerful tool in like the Ethereum, ecosystem where it's super easy to see like Solidity code in the contract and see how many number of pending transactions. And then there's so much easy to navigate through the entire ecosystem. So are you guys have any plan to improve the user experience in Solana Explorer?
Yeah, so explorers are somewhat tricky because there's no clear revenue model for the companies that are running explorers. So we have the basic explorer at explorer.solana.com. That's primarily used by developers and like the validators for basic stats. By no means Solana Labs is saying this should be the main explorer that everyone should be using. The effort that's being spent on that is minimal. It's like less than one engineer working on that. And internally, I don't think we are planning to spend more resources on that specifically. We are encouraging either through grants or funding teams building that. So if you think that's a big gap and you have a business model around building something like that, you should definitely do it.
All right, thanks.
All right, other questions? Oh, no.
All right. Tell us a bit about your experience going from working at a trading firm to working in the open, working at Solana. And in particular, what have you guys learned? Like the initial Solana footprint socially was pretty small. And now you guys, I think, just announced something like 20 different hacker houses around the world. It's this world tour. There's a lot of excitement and energy. Like, what have you experienced? What have you learned? And where do you think Solana is going to go with this like physical footprint and hacker house mentality?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, like I said, it's about building the developer community. So the personal goal is to have in the Electric Capital report 4,000 engineers by the end of the year building protocols on Solana, so 4x growth. And that excludes everyone in the closed source ecosystem. But I would want more companies building as well, and they don't necessarily need to be open source. So just seeing user adoption. Like I want to be able to go, to my parents and say, hey, download the app and you can start using it and be comfortable with most of it. And I don't think we are there yet. In terms of the other metrics that I use for user adoption, from the user journey, I want people that are not into crypto be able to start trading on Serum and using some protocols without having anything within like less than 60 seconds. So download the app, create the wallet, have confidence in it, and be able to fund it in that time frame. And right now, I think, especially if you think about mobile experience, that's not there yet. And on the desktop, to set up everything properly would take you, I don't know, roughly 10 minutes probably, and that's not a good metric. Did that answer the question? More?
It's me again. I'm going to give you a bigger question because I know Totally thinks about the trilemma and how you guys think about, decentralization versus scalability versus security. This matters when you're trying to 10x or 100x performance.
Yeah, sure.
And so, different chains have different philosophies. I'm not sure. A lot of people here are from our world, and I don't think they, think about that as much as deeply as I know you guys have. So
yeah, one thing that I don't like with this question, that most of it
I don't like you didn't honor your non-compete.
No, yeah.
How about that?
No, the question is good, but what I wanted to say is. Usually when people ask this question in public, they assume that you are at the edge of the triangle. And I don't think we are at the edge yet, especially in Solana. So it's true that you need to pick which two you are, but I think we are still inside of the triangle and we can potentially move it to optimize each side as Solana at least. And most of the time when people ask it, they're like, oh, we are on one edge and we cannot move easily on the other side. We have a couple of things that we are doing with the validator community, and Solana Foundation is doing that as well. So we have a server program where if you want to run the validator, Solana Foundation negotiates, for example, the deals with different data centers globally. We order hardware, we put it in the data center, we rented them to people that want to run the validators and optimize the user acquisition in terms of staking without worrying about negotiating deals with the data centers. And from that perspective, we have a lot of room to grow from the decentralization by having more independent people running the validators by themselves. I think we are making that process much easier. The initial hurdle for people is, I don't know the data centers globally. How do I approach them? How do I get the hardware there? And if you're doing it yourself, it's much harder than going to AWS and getting a machine that what most people do for EVM compatible chains. But that has a disadvantage because like, are you really more decentralized if everything is running on AWS? So we'll try to work with as many data centers globally as possible, negotiate those deals, have the hardware there. You can then go apply for the program, have potentially better cost model around the hardware that you got there, with good connectivity, and then your main job is running the validator, making sure it receives all the updates, and then going to people and acquiring stake. And what I really liked during the Q4 of last year is there's more NFT communities running their own validators. So you can look at Solana Monkey Business starting running a validator. Fagbird started running the validator. So those are some of the projects in the NFT space. And that just like increases fundamentally the decentralization more than putting servers in AWS. From the speed perspective, I think we still have the room to grow before we hit the network limits, like physical network limits. Yeah, so I think we can have that argument where we see that each of the dimensions cannot be pushed independently more, and we are definitely on the edge. I don't think we are there yet.
Sort of a related question to that so Leo this morning had interesting things to say about why you should consider running your own validator. I think he was addressing more the org versus the individual. I was just curious, like, let's say me, I wanted to run a Solana validator, read through the docs, maybe get the support on Discord. Is that something like practical? Like where is that currently?
Yeah, 100%. Hop on the validator Discord, download the client. You know, you can start running it on a gaming machine. The primary constraint of running it at home is like the network. You need a good network connectivity. So you probably want to run it in a data center and then apply for the server program. Like Solana, one of the things that I think we did well from Solana Foundation last year was do large purchases of hardware before the supply chain problems started really hitting the like backlogs of orders. You could have seen that with like hard drives being like very hard to acquire, like memory chips, and our, like at least Solana Foundation approach to that is think ahead of like 1 year, 2 years and start ordering large bulks of things like hardware that then is rented out to people and is sufficiently decentralized across the world, right? We definitely don't want everyone going for the cheapest data center. We had this like big push, and we are actually thinking about it, like in which data centers are you physically? So we have the metrics like, oh, everyone is running in like Hertzner data center on like OVH provider, and it's like, oh, it's because that like data center is cheap. But is it fundamentally increasing the decentralization if there's a fire in that data center? Probably not. So if you are thinking about it, look at the server program. It's on like solana.com. It describes how you can apply. Anyone is welcome to apply. Get the hardware, start running it, and take it from there. It's really not that hard, but Brian can disagree. I mean, running a single one is much easier than running a fleet of the validators for people to use, especially if you are thinking about the RPC and people are using it for interacting with applications. I personally cannot run validator as Solana Labs employee, but if I wasn't Solana Labs employee, I would run it. All right, perfect. If you still want to talk, you are afraid to ask questions in public, I will be hanging around and you can chat one-on-one with me. Thank you everyone for listening.